Tara, you're really useless. You can't even do housework like Mom says, and you work at a small company for peanuts. You couldn't live without me, right, Mom? Yeah, that's right. And on top of that, your family home is falling apart like a haunted house. Your parents are farmers and dirty every day. Plus, Tara can't have kids. What a scam artist. Harsh words like these flew around, but it wasn't anything new. For the past year, my husband Mark had teamed up with his mother to keep tormenting me. And I always just nodded in silence. But this time, I calmly retorted. I'm going back to my family home now. With my $1 million car to my $2 million mansion. Huh? A $1 million car? A $2 million mansion? Haha. What a sore loser. I thought you'd finally retort, but you just spout nonsense. Even my prized Mercedes is only $140,000. Ignorance is scary. Tara, if you want to leave, go ahead. You'll come crawling back soon enough. My husband looked genuinely amused. He was tormenting me just for fun. But he was finished. I knew everything. And I was going to show him the reality he was clueless about. I gritted my teeth and waited for the right moment. My husband kept laughing. My mother-in-law also laughed and coldly turned to me. Mark, that's enough now. Laughing that much is just cruel to Tara. Tara, Mark has been brilliant since he was a kid. He graduated from a top university and got a job at a prestigious company. Everyone envies him, and we're so proud. Not only that, but he also supported his father and me. How many times do I have to tell you? I guess you can't remember that with your brain, which was trained in a small-town high school. I sighed internally as it started again. Since we got married, my mother-in-law constantly praised Mark's brilliance. And she always looked down on me for being a high school graduate from the countryside. I heard that Mark's father, who ran his own business for years, died 10 years ago from stress and illness. Mark's mother retired a while back, supposedly to help with Mark's father's self-employment, but before that, she was active as an interpreter. Since then, Mark has been supporting his mother who is now alone. The most painful part of our marriage so far has been blamed for not having children. I wanted kids just as much as anyone else. I even consulted Mark about his mother's nastiness, but I was coldly dismissed as the cause due to infertility and inability to do household chores. From there, Mark started to belittle me like his mother does, and it's been like that ever since. The mother and Mark were getting worked up with their usual condescending remarks. That's when I decided to confront Mark's mother with facts she didn't know. I pulled out 2 sets of bank account statement from my bag. Mark's face went pale when he saw them. What's this? First, it's a joint bank account we've been using together. I slowly turned the pages of the bank statement. It clearly showed that we've been saving each other's salaries since we got married. And on the last page, there was a withdrawal of $120,000 in one go. Mark used this to buy a car without my permission. He used our joint assets. Both of them were frozen, but I turned to the last page of the second one. You said your Mercedes cost $140,000, right? $120,000 isn't enough. The shortfall was taken from here. The second bank book contained the money I saved when I was single. $40,000 was withdrawn on the same day as the joint assets. No, you're mistaken. It was wrong of me to use it without permission, but it wasn't for buying the car. Mark stammered in his defense, but I had another piece of evidence. Don't play dumb. This is the contract you signed when you bought the car, right? The withdrawal date matches the contract date. He didn't expect me to know where the contract was. Mark remained silent, looking down. You've been calling me low-paid all this time, yet you're contradicting yourself by dipping into my money, your wife's money. If only they had apologized right then and there, maybe there could have been a slightly better future. However, after glancing back and forth between my husband and me, my mother-in-law uttered something outrageous. Mark, look up. You've done nothing wrong. You've supported this defective wife of yours all this time. Besides, once you're married, you have the right to freely use shared assets and your wife's money. What is she even saying? It seems like she doesn't mind at all what her son has done. I looked over at my husband, who seemed pleased that his mother was siding with him, sporting a smug expression. My mother-in-law pushed me from behind and escorted me to the front door. My husband followed silently from behind. Well then, goodbye, poor person. With that prompt from my husband, he swung open the front door wide. They intended to forcibly kick me out among themselves, but I calmly replied, "Oh, just as my ride is here. Thank you for everything." Why are they here? The moment my husband looked outside the front door, he was surprised. More than surprised, his eyes were sparkling. That's because parked there was one of his dream cars, a Lamborghini. My husband's hobby is cars, and he even talks about owning multiple companies in the future. On his days off, he ignores me and spends the whole day tinkering with his beloved Mercedes-Benz. The real deal is so cool, $1 million car. Just then, the car door creaked open and two people in work clothes stepped out. "Sorry for calling you out of the blue, Mom and Dad," I said, and my parents politely greeted my husband and mother-in-law. "Hello, nice to see you. Thank you for taking care of our daughter. I was just working until a moment ago, so please excuse my appearance." My mother-in-law and husband exchanged bewildered glances, unable to grasp the situation. My parents smiled warmly, but there was a look of anger in their eyes. Then, my husband slowly spoke to my parents. Dad, what's the story behind this car?" "Well, my father was a car enthusiast just like you. He gave up his license as he got older, but back in the day, he was very passionate about cars, both for work and as a hobby. This car was something he always wanted, so we gifted it to him for his 60th birthday." "A gift? Such an expensive car?" "That's right. Usually, he drives a pickup truck for farm work, but he brought this car today for the occasion." Even after hearing my father's explanation, my husband and mother-in-law seemed incredulous. As my mother-in-law had mentioned earlier, my parents' home is an old farmhouse. Born and raised in the city, maybe that's why, but these two have always insulted my parents' home, saying things like it's dark and feels like something might come out, it's full of old people and feels gloomy, or it's dirty. Just a few days ago, while I was making dinner with vegetables sent from my parents' farm, they silently threw away both the meal and the vegetables. If they just criticized me, I could have tolerated it, but denying the vegetables that my dear parents painstakingly grew is unforgivable. Fed up with their behavior, I immediately called my parents and explained everything that had been happening. The two were taken aback by the luxury car and my father's explanation. But they quickly retorted, "That's a lie. You probably just rented that car. Besides, a farm's income isn't that much anyway. You probably stretched yourself just to show off." "That's right. There's no way you guys could afford a luxury car." As usual, they continued to mock farmers. But these two don't understand anything about farms, my hometown, or my parents. It's time for me and my parents to teach them. "Mark, remember how you said a farm's income isn't much? Then what do you think my parents' annual income is? Don't ask such obvious questions. It's probably around $40,000 to $50,000. And my annual income is $200,000, so it's less than half of that." Laughable. "I didn't ask about your income. As a married couple, I know. By the way, your answer is way off. It's one digit short of the correct answer." $400,000 to $500,000? That's more than twice as much as Mark's?" "Yes, that's right. How about that? Will you retract all the slanderous remarks you've made about my parents' farm?" My mother-in-law and husband looked shocked and stunned. In the midst of this, my mother spoke up. "You've judged us as poor just because we're farmers. Well, there were times when our income was low indeed. That's understandable. But if that's the reason you've been bullying our precious daughter, then it's a different story." My mother, who had been calm until now, spoke with determination. Despite their widened eyes, my husband and mother-in-law tried to argue again. My mother-in-law spoke in a calm, detached tone. I wasn't bullying her. I was just giving some advice because she wasn't fitting into the role of a wife. Right, Mark? Yeah, that's right. Mom was just looking out for you. By the way, I've already shown this to my parents. Saying that, I operated my smartphone and showed them the video footage. It captured all the instances of my husband and mother-in-law bullying me, including when they discarded the meal and vegetables. They didn't notice, but luckily, I had hidden a small camera in the house for future use. Realizing there was video evidence, my mother-in-law and husband were left speechless. Once it had come to this, there was no choice but to acknowledge it. My parents have known about this for a while now. Right? My parents looked at the two with cold eyes. I can't leave my daughter with someone who judges people by appearances. Tara, let's go. With that, I got into the Lamborghini my father had driven up. I was grateful to my parents for driving an unfamiliar foreign car to fight back against my husband and mother-in-law. Thanks again, Mom, Dad. Suddenly, my parents, who had been stern just moments ago, burst into laughter inside the car. Ha ha ha. That felt good. Dad, you were really tough earlier. It's been a while. Yeah, he didn't know anything about us and was talking big. I wish I could have said more to him. But we gotta keep pushing forward. Tara, help out until you find a job, okay? Cheerful parents. This was their usual selves. I've always loved them like this. Approaching 30 and feeling a bit ashamed to rely on them again, I brought up the next topic with my parents. Of course, I'll help out a lot, but there's something else I'd like your cooperation with, because... My parents readily agreed upon hearing my request. Yeah, we've been meaning to do that too. It'll be fun, hee hee. As we had this conversation, the car arrived at my parents' home. Over the next few days back home, while helping with farm work, I felt a sense of relief. Since getting married, I hadn't been in touch with nature much, and without the harassment from my husband and mother-in-law, I appreciated the rural air even more. While getting ready to go to the fields with my parents, I noticed a familiar Mercedes parked near the house. Seeing it, I couldn't help but smirk inwardly. As expected, my husband and mother-in-law emerged from the Mercedes, dressed more stylishly than usual, which didn't quite fit the rural setting. They're probably trying to show us how different their world and ours are. Yep, still the same old rundown house. Geez, it's so gross. Are there only bugs and animals living in this town? With deliberate disdainful looks and gestures, the two pointed at my parents' house and laughed. If there's any humans around here, it's you guys. What brings you here so early in the morning? As my father approached them and said this, my husband chuckled in response. Talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in income, that's gotta be a lie. This rundown shack looks like where poor folks huddle up. Plus, that dirty pickup truck. No way this is a rich person's house and car. Lies are the beginning of thievery, they say. In a place like this, even thieves would run away. My parents sighed deeply, clearly exasperated by their rude behavior. If you think it's so dirty, why bother coming in the first place? Dad, we've got no choice but to show them that. Yeah, that's right. Would you two mind following us for a bit? And so, the five of us walked towards a certain place. It took just over 5 minutes, during which my husband and mother-in-law grumbled complaints like hard to walk and my shoes are getting dirty. All right, we're here. It doesn't quite suit this countryside, but Mom and Dad sure went all out. I had seen it in several photos before, but seeing the real thing made me even more astonished. The place we arrived at was a stark contrast to my parents' aging home, an enormous mansion. But what surprised me more than anything were my husband and mother-in-law. They must have remembered that. I said so, let's head back to my parents' place right away. With a car worth $1 million and a mansion worth $2 million. They must have thought I was joking, but now they seemed speechless. As I mentioned earlier, This grand mansion was undoubtedly built by my parents. Wow, look at all these! From that Lamborghini earlier to all these super luxury cars. Maybachs, Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, how many are there? Several luxury cars were parked in the spacious parking lot. These cars were all part of my grandfather's collection. My husband, who knew a lot about cars, was excited to see all these luxury cars right in front of him. If you sold all these, it would be hundreds of thousands, no, over 1 million. For my husband, who was knowledgeable about cars, knowing the prices and market value was basic knowledge. My husband waved his hand. His mother-in-law also stood there with her mouth hanging open, seemingly finally understanding that my parents were wealthy. If you could build a house like this, why do you live in such an old house? My timid mother-in-law asked. After a brief pause, my father began speaking slowly. We haven't had it easy from the start either. Agriculture depends on the weather, so we didn't have a stable income every year. When Tara was a student, the fields were devastated by floods and typhoons, and life was really tough back then. Despite that, Tara understood the situation and chose to attend the nearest high school and work. But we couldn't afford any luxuries. Hey, Dad, don't spill unnecessary details. That was when my parents saw our situation and graciously offered us the house they were living in. That's the rundown house you saw earlier. My father proudly explained to my husband and mother-in-law. You folks who judge everything by appearances wouldn't understand, but that house is filled with many memories for our family. That's why we've left it just the way it is. Our lives became much easier after moving to that house. Agriculture has been modernized over time, and efficiency has improved. I had been thinking of repaying my parents in some way, and this new house is that. Let me say it again, what's important isn't the appearance. Whether it's things or people, their true value is understood only when you know what's inside. You guys, even though you're smart, didn't seem to get that. My mother-in-law and husband muttered quietly, looking down. Just when my parents sighed in relief, thinking it was settled for now. He. Ha ha ha. Suddenly, my mother-in-law and husband burst into laughter loudly. My parents looked at them as if to say, what's going on now? Hey, what's so funny? Haven't you figured out by now that we're not poor? My husband said, snorting at me. Sure, your parents are amazing. But out of those wonderful parents, you ended up with a useless infertile. Yeah, that's right. Mark the Excellent got stuck with this useless one. Be grateful. Thinking she had insulted her daughter, the father lunged at the husband. However, I gently restrained my father's hand. Easy there, Dad. Calm down. Before you get worked up, could you look at this? Mom, take a look too. I showed them a picture on my phone, and all three of them widened their eyes simultaneously, exclaiming, huh? The photo showed my husband entering a gynecologist's office. Well, Mark, going for tests secretly without telling your infertile wife. That's thoughtful. Yeah, right? Despite mocking infertility, secretly getting tested for it. That's actually nice. Up until that point anyway. So, here are the results. You're kidding, right? Why? Why do you have this photo? I told you before, didn't I? That I set up the camera to gather evidence of your bullying. And then it caught you fumbling while hiding this diagnosis report. I even figured out you were going into the room. But your room was such a mess, it was hard to find. And this is my test result. The three of them scrutinized my and my husband's test results multiple times. Then, they looked at my husband again with cold eyes. What's different now is even my mother-in-law seems angry at her son. Mark, why didn't you say anything until now? As it turned out from the test results, it wasn't me who was infertile, it was my husband. He probably thought he had hidden it well, but I had already noticed. But not only had he bullied me, he had conspired with his mother to label me as infertile while hiding his own condition. Just confronting him then wouldn't have satisfied me. That's why I deliberately let it slide until today. My mother-in-law demanded answers from her son once more. Through tears, he replied, "I was scared. I was afraid of being disappointed if you found out I was infertile. So, I pretended Tara was infertile and bullied her. I'm grateful to Mom for all she's done, so I didn't want her to be disappointed in me." My mother-in-law looked at her son with a puzzled expression. Then my mother coldly questioned her. "You said it before, right? That being unable to have children makes someone useless. So, does that mean your son, Mark here, is useless?" I'm sorry. My mother-in-law said deeply, a stark change from before. At the same time, my husband knelt on the floor, placing his hands down. I and my parents hesitated on what to say to them for a while. Then suddenly, my husband grabbed my legs. "I'm sorry for bullying you all this time, saying bad things about your parents, and hiding my infertility. I'll be a better husband who supports you. I won't interfere with household chores anymore. So, please come back. Mark's right. I apologize for everything so far, and Mark will take responsibility too. Shall we live together in the city again? Let's get along even better than before with your parents. Do you even understand what you're saying?" As Mom said, a true essence lies within. People like you may look good on the outside but have the worst personalities. In other words, once you're rotten inside, there's no going back. So just leave already. Dad, Mom, shall we get back to work? We're talking about turning over a new leaf. Hold on. We came all the way out to this countryside. You're annoying. Leave now before you disturb the neighbors any further. Please don't ever show your faces in front of us again. Leaving behind the yelling husband and mother-in-law, we headed off to our tasks for the day. After dinner, I thanked my parents once again. "Sorry for taking up your time before work today. I caused trouble by marrying someone like him. Thank you for always being on my side. For our daughter, it's nothing. And we're sorry we didn't notice the terrible bullying you endured." While my mother and I were talking, my father, who had been preparing the bath, entered. And he smiled meaningfully. "Too bad, but it won't end like this for those two." Huh. I remembered. That guy still has something he's hiding. Saying that, I presented something to my parents. They didn't just look shocked, they broke into smiles. And the three of us began preparing for our final counterattack. A few days later, following my parents' instructions, I hid myself in a certain place. Sure enough, you came. Muttering to myself, I observed the situation. The man came to that place with a crowbar in hand. Looking around nervously, thinking no one was there. "What are you doing there, Mark?" "Whoa! Why are you there?" "Well, it's our house, so of course I'm here." "What were you planning to do with that thing?" The place where Mark and I was in the mansion's parking lot. In fact, my father and I had anticipated Mark coming back here again. The trigger was the moment my husband looked at a luxury car and uttered these words. "If I sold all of these, it'd be hundreds of thousands, no, over $1 million. At that moment, I sensed something dark lurking behind his eyes. Furthermore, there's still an unbelievable secret my husband has. I'm going to confront him head-on about it right now. Mark, let's cut to the chase. You were trying to steal that car, weren't you?" Why would I do that? I just wanted to have another look." "Then what about that crowbar you're holding?" "Well, I guess you must have a reason that makes stealing cars inevitable for you." "What are you talking about? I have no reason to steal a car. You bought a Mercedes-Benz with my savings and our joint savings." I realized it back then. Alongside the evidence of infertility, I also discovered irrefutable proof that you're in debt. Debt? I have no idea what you're talking about. Though he turns away, beads of sweat are visibly running down his face. Something's fishy about it from the start. With your high income, there should have been solid savings of your own. So, what's the deal? Well, he's desperately trying to come up with an excuse. I threw an envelope at him. As he checked its contents, his face turned pale in an instant. Inside the envelope were loan documents, photos, and the detective's investigation results. You were just pretending to go for tests and treatments for infertility, right? Actually, your real goal was meeting that young nurse, isn't that right? The detective's report not only included the fact that he had been meeting the nurse but also detailed their conversations. You lied to her about being single and lavished her with designer goods, right? Thanks to that, all our savings disappeared. And yet, you used my savings to buy a Mercedes just to woo her. My husband bit his lip and remained silent. He must feel bitter knowing that everything had been meticulously investigated. I pressed on even further. Felicity, you were afraid of disappointing your mother-in-law, right? That was a lie too. The truth is, you were just planning to divorce me and remarry with her. In fact, you've been taking care of your mother-in-law all this time just because you wanted to get the entire inheritance. You see her as a nuisance, don't you? Hey, I've got all the evidence. Yeah, that's right. I just used you because you were bullying Tara for me. With no brothers or father, I can take over the estate. As you said, I'm getting a divorce and marrying her. That's right. What do you think, Felicity? Mark, how could you lie to me all this time? What? Why are you here too, Mom? Mother-in-law emerged from the shadows of the car. She looked furious with her eyes bulging. Just because you showed up here alone, you've been summoned. I don't want to be called Mom by you anymore. As she said that, my mother-in-law began to cry loudly. That's right. Right after my husband entered, my parents and I called my mother-in-law. Perhaps because my home is only about a 30-minute drive away, she responded promptly. I thought it was a good opportunity for her to see my husband's true nature. No, that's not true. Tara made it all up. I didn't say anything bad about Mom. My husband tried to grab his mother's hand, but she brushed it away and slapped him across the face. Don't touch me. After Tara lied about infertility last time, I can't trust anything you say. Never cross the threshold of this house again. She said that and quickly walked away. Unfortunately, my husband's hell didn't end with his mother abandoning him. This mansion has tight security, and the system was already activated when my husband entered the parking lot. Several security guards were trying to capture him. Let go! I didn't steal anything. I was just looking. Hey, help me out! If that's so, then what's that thing you're holding? Come on, let's go. My husband was taken away by the security guards amidst his yelling and shouting. As expected, he'll be in police custody for a while. After preparing a lot of evidence, my divorce from my husband was easily finalized. Rumor has it that Tara's ex-husband's affair with a nurse had long been known at the company. Apparently, colleagues had spotted him several times walking in the downtown area with the notorious nurse after work. Due to this, he's been facing harassment from some colleagues, but he can't quit due to debt repayment issues. At the same time, he seems to have realized how foolish he was for bullying me, and he keeps sending me apology emails repeatedly. Of course, I'm ignoring them now, as I have no intention of forgiving him at this point. I also apologized to Felicity's mother-in-law, but she cold-shouldered me. Furthermore, it turned out that the nurse he was cheating with was actually married. It seems Tara's ex-husband is completely alone now. By the way, Felicity's mother-in-law, who had been bullying me the most, has been dubbed a wicked mother-in-law by the neighbors for her bullying and is reportedly feeling quite uncomfortable. On the other hand, I've returned to my hometown and secured a job. Although my parents said it would be fine for me to stay at home for a while, I felt I couldn't continue to rely on them so much and decided to live alone. Instead, I spend my holidays helping out on the farm at my parents' place and visiting my grandparents. While my parents mostly live in the grand mansion, they actually spend more time in the older, deteriorating house where they feel more comfortable. We built it, but this place still feels more like home to me and your father. My mother always says with a smile, memories have an irreplaceable value. That's what I think when I see my parents.